Hello, it's a pleasure to be here today, and my name is Paul McDonald. I'm a Senior Executive Director at Robert Half. Today, we will be presenting and I will be moderating a panel discussion on the changing nature of the workplace with the entrance of Generation Z, referred to as the second wave of Millennials. We will look at Gen Z's priorities, preferences, and career goals, and how to successfully integrate them into the multi-generational work teams. Before we get started, I'd like to address just a few housekeeping items for everyone on the phone today. Please note the small icons across the bottom of your webinar dashboard. They provide access to various tools, including technical support, an evaluation survey, today's slides, and the bios of everyone that's speaking today. We will have a Q&A session, question and answer session, at the end of the discussion. Please enter your questions in the open field on the left-hand side of your webinar dashboard, and we'll answer as many as possible. Please enter any questions related to technical difficulties by clicking on the yellow Help icon, and the On24 support team will assist you. Let me begin with some introductions, please, on the next slide. First, I'd like to welcome Bruce Tolgan. Bruce is a book author and consultant who is internationally recognized for his research on young people in the workplace that has been ongoing since 1993. Bruce?
Thank you so much. I want to thank Robert Half, and thanks Paul McDonald, and thanks to the other panelists and everyone else who's involved in this. And we've been doing research on the front lines of the workplace for 23 years. We've interviewed hundreds of thousands of people. And a big part of our focus has been interviewing new young people as they're coming into the workplace and as they're getting up to speed in their careers, in the first stage of their careers. We interview young people, we interview their managers, and we've been advising leaders and organizations ranging from the United States Army to Walmart on these issues for decades now. So I'm honored to be part of it.
Very glad to have you here today, Bruce. Next, I'd like to introduce Kirk Ballman, Vice President, Career Services and Alumni Engagement for Enactus. Kirk?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am excited to be on this panel today. The organization that I work for is called Enactus. We are a global nonprofit organization dedicated to inspiring students to improve the world through entrepreneurial action. And we're in 36 countries, 1,700 plus universities around the world. Over 70,000 students are involved in Enactus globally. And we provide a platform for teams of outstanding university students to really create community development projects that put people's own ingenuity and talent at the center of improving their own livelihood. To really sum it up, we believe that investing in students who take entrepreneurial action for others creates a better world for us all. I'm excited to be here.
Very glad to have you as well, Kirk. Thank you. And last but not least, Aubrey Ryder. Aubrey's a recent college graduate and an Enactus alum. So, Aubrey?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aubrey Ryder. I graduated from Roberts Wesleyan College in Rochester, New York in May of 2015. I currently live in Chicago working as a barista and studying comedy at the Second City.
Great. So glad to have you. And let me introduce myself. Paul McDonald, as I mentioned, Senior Executive Director with Robert Half. Many of you may know Robert Half, but for those that don't, Robert Half was founded in 1948, and we focus on professional staffing, specializing in the areas of technology, accounting and finance, legal, creative and marketing, and highly skilled administrative staff. And as I mentioned, we've been doing this since 1948, and we have 400 offices worldwide. So thank you to everyone who's speaking today and devoting your time. Next slide, please. What we'll be covering today are several key topics. We'll share some research to provide you with an overview of the 4 generations currently that are active in the workplace. And we'll provide you with some insights into the priorities, preferences, and communication styles of Gen Zers, as we'll be referring to them, and what Gen Zers like to be, how they like to be communicated with, and their preferences and priorities at the workplace. We'll also provide guidance on how to successfully integrate Generation Z into the multi-generational teams. So just a quick overview on the next slide of the generations. We only had room for 4, but I'll start out with a 5th, and that is the traditionalists or the silent generation, those born before 1945. Most have left the workforce today, but there's a few that are remaining. The majority of the workforce today is made up of these 4 generations. Baby boomers born between 1946 and 1964. Some are looking forward to retirement. Many are truly continuing past traditional retirement age. Generation X, those born between 1965 and 1977. These are mature professionals. Many hold executive positions. Many Gen Xers are now in their early 50s, and they have heavy responsibilities, not only on the job, but also raising children, managing and aging parents, and so forth. Then we get into the Millennials, Generation Y and Generation Z. Generation Y, 1978 birth dates to 1989, and Generation Z, 1990 to 1999. We collectively refer to Y and Z as the Millennials. Some people are not familiar with that we group Gen Y and Gen Z together to collectively know them as Millennials. And Gen Z being the first wave, and obviously Gen Z being the second wave of that cohort. The most recent entry, Gen Z, born between 1990 and 99, now in their later teens, earlier teens, or early 20s, I should say. The next slide is heavy in content, but I'll give you a few examples here of these 4 generations and the behavior, training styles, learning styles, how they like to be communicated with, how they communicate, problem solving, leadership style, feedback, and change management. Just to look through this a little bit, let's hone in on the communication style. The baby boomers, if you look at my bio that's as part of your resources, you'll know that I identify with the baby boomer generation. Guarded. The Gen Xers would refer to the communication style as hub and spoke. Gen Yers, collaborative, and Gen Z, face-to-face. The feedback loop that they like, we're traditionally in the baby boomer generation, we have an annual review. If we're lucky enough, we get, we're used to or we're brought up with 2 times a year to get the feedback. Gen Zers like constant and frequent. Gen Y on demand, and Gen Xers maybe on a weekly or a daily basis. So just a few examples of the things that we can dig into here, and that you look at the crossover amongst the generations. Before we go any further, I'd like to just make one very important point. These are generalizations. It's never wise to stereotype an entire generation with the information here, or for that matter, anytime. There's always exceptions and overlap. Still, what some of them say in surveys about their workplace preferences can be useful and meaningful in managing them. The characteristics and attitude we're discussing today are all based on surveys Robert Half and other organizations have done. The Gen Z information, for example, is based on input from real Gen Z individuals who were polled for research, a research report that Robert Half did with Enactus, Kirk's organization, to create a white paper. And the name of that white paper is Get Ready for Generation Z. And it's definitely available for download as part of the resources on this On24 platform. Very interesting, in-depth study of Gen Z, as spoken to us by the survey of Gen Z. So let's turn to one of our panelists at this point. Bruce, if you would, just what advantages and potential challenges do multiple generations in the workplace present for employers and hiring managers?
Well, of course, there are always different people of different generations working side by side. That's nothing new. And so there's always this generational diversity issue. But there are 3 things that are different today. One is what we call the numbers problem, and that is that on one end of the spectrum, the workforce is aging. There's this growing age bubble in the workforce on the older end. And on the other end, the workforce is getting younger. there is this rising global youth tide coming up into the workforce today. And in the middle, there's a gap. The prime age workforce, Generation X, and the oldest millennials and the youngest boomers, the prime age workforce is shrinking as an overall percentage of the workforce. So this has huge implications for staffing strategy, recruiting, onboarding, up-to-speed training, performance management, communication, career paths, retention, rewards, knowledge transfer, leadership development. All of these issues are affected just by the numbers problem. But the second thing that's different is that the way people look at their working lives and careers and their attitudes toward their employers is changing. And so the old-fashioned model is long-term, hierarchical, pay your dues, climb the ladder, wait for the system to take care of you. But nowadays, people of all ages are thinking more short-term and transactional, but especially the youngest, least experienced people, they can't relate to the old-fashioned, long-term, hierarchical model of careers. They think short-term and transactional. It doesn't mean they can't be long-term in an organization, but it's one day at a time. And then the third thing that's changing is, we're all living through the most profound changes in our economy, society, culture, and workplace than any time since the Industrial Revolution. So the younger people are not going to grow up and settle down. Older, more experienced people, we're going to get more and more like them. And so these three fundamental differences today are what make generational difference so interesting to look at as a business challenge, as a management challenge.
Very, very interesting. And you've studied the millennial generation for some time now, and it would be great for the audience to hear from you, an introduction to the newest millennials coming into the workforce. So, Bruce, anything you can give on that topic?
Well, so we've been tracking the millennials now for quite a while, and the youngest, least experienced people are those born 1990 to 99. If you look at the oldest millennials are 38 today. So that's why we find it useful to break it up into two groups, because the youngest millennials are 17. And they're a little bit more like, they're the children of the 2000s. They came of age in the 2000s during economic uncertainty and war and threat of terrorism and environmental cataclysm. And, but meanwhile, they're raised by helicopter parents on steroids, and they learn how to think, learn, and communicate while attached to handheld supercomputers. So, a lot of the trends that we've seen developing from Generation X to the first wave millennials, the death of job security, technology, globalization, the changing mindset about careers. A lot of these things, diversity, increasing diversity and appreciation and understanding of diversity, a lot of these trends are continuing from the boomers to X to Y to Z. But the big shift is in this profound uncertainty that has defined the mindset of the second wave millennials, profound uncertainty, and then inflected by helicopter parenting on steroids. They've always had so much guidance, direction, support, coaching, structure from grown-ups. And then, of course, being attached to handheld supercomputers, so they think, learn, and communicate very differently because of all that.
No question about that. And as we look at the next slide, you touched on some of these points. One of the key points I just heard you say that's not on the slide, and people forget this, the oldest part of the millennial generation is 38 years of age. And you hear a lot of people today talk about the millennial generation as they were just moving out of college and university. But, they're coming of age, they're the majority of the workforce. And as you mentioned, they are here, and it's up to us to help integrate them and manage them and help move along and learn something from them as well.
Well, that's so powerful, and that's why your point that you have to be very careful about generalizing. It's important to look at these broad trends in attitude and behavior, but look at the second wave millennials. They're the new young workforce, and we're seeing a lot of nuances in this second wave of the millennials that, that employers really need to tune into.
Yep. And, as we look at this slide, the young professionals coming in the workforce today don't believe they'll have it easy. Our recent surveys we conducted last year, 77% believe they need to work harder than previous generations to get ahead. And as they map out their lives, more than 50% of the Generation Zs fully expect to work until they're 70 years of age. So,
and they're right about all that. They're right about all that.
Yeah, exactly. Next slide, please. Here's some more facts. The Generation Z, as one of the most educated of all generations, have plans around the fast track to success. They're ambitious strivers who want to be well prepared and well trained in order to achieve success. When asked about where they see themselves 5 years after graduating from college, Generation Z are clear about where they're going. 32% aspire to management or supervisory roles in a corporate environment. 24% think that in 5 years' time, they will be working their way up the corporate ladder. And 20% are interested in pursuing self-employment or entrepreneurship. Here's a question for you, Aubrey. How do you see your generation's career aspirations different than that of, say, your parents or your grandparents?
That's actually a really interesting question. I was reading this book. It's called Modern Romance by Aziz Ansari. And they talk about this kind of in a romance way, but you can totally bring it to kind of the workforce where, in past generations, you kind of do what's expected of you. It was either like enter the family business or like what's convenient, what the town offered. But today I see so many of my friends and people that I graduated with, they went to college at 18 because it's what is expected of them. Or in my case, like I went at 17. And then halfway through realizing it's not what you actually want to do, and is kind of going off of this dreamy, like this is how my parents did it, and you just kind of have to bring it back to the reality of today. And so just going for a job that you love and where you feel important even from like the lower part of the totem pole, and just make sure you can pay your bills. And I chose my job in coffee because I love it. And it does pay my bills while I work on things that don't necessarily do that. So I can go to bed happy every night.
Yep, that's outstanding. I think, when you look at and think about, your parents or your grandparents and how it matches with you, would you say that that's different from, say, what you heard from your grandparents?
Yeah, like I don't think my grandma really had a job until she got divorced, which was really like different. You didn't really see divorce very often in her generation, but my grandpa, he went to work at GM and worked there for 50 years, and then finally just retired and kind of did his thing. And I don't think that'll be very popular at all during my generation. You're not going to see people working in one place really for more than 10 years.
Yeah, the research would back you up on that as your comment as well. So thank you. And next slide, please. And when you look at how do Gen Zers feel about the previous generations, most have very strong, respectful relationships with mom and dad. 82% in the survey said that their parents had influenced their career choices. And as a whole, Generation Z have experienced more guidance from teachers and coaches and mentors than any other generation, as Bruce was referencing earlier, too. Because the generation are good listeners and avid learners, they don't want to repeat their parents' mistakes, such as not finishing their education, maybe not following their passions or settling for financial stability, as Aubrey was talking about, and not pursuing a career because of family obligations. So, Kirk, this question's for you. What type of workplace leadership does Gen Z flourish under?
That's a great question. In my experience, what I've seen is they flourish under open, transparent communication. They look for managers who will be there when they need some guidance and have a question, need a little bit of steering in the right direction, but that will also let them do their jobs. So, they're not looking for people who are micromanagers. They want to be able to have that entrepreneurial spirit and do their own thing while furthering the company or the organization's mission. So, my advice, speaking to new managers who are working with this emerging workforce, is let them do their jobs. Support them along the way. It seems simple, and quite frankly, it is simple, but that takes some getting used to. So, be there as a backup, as a cheerleader, but let them forge their own way, and support them.
Yep. Good advice, and maybe along the way too that the supervisors and managers of other generations that are in the other generations might learn something along the way as well. There's a lot to learn from the Generation Z.
Absolutely.
So next slide, please. When it comes to the workplace, our research shows that Generation Z have attitudes and preferences that differ from the other generations, as we've been chatting about. Let's look at job hopping, for instance. Job hopping across the generations was the subject of a recent Accountemps survey, Accountemps being a division of Robert Half. And that survey of employees 18 years of age and older who worked in an office. For Generation Z, there's no stigma in job hopping. Most Gen Zers expect to work for 4 companies throughout their career. Well, I might add 4 surprised me too. I thought that there might be more than that. But according to the Accountemps survey, 57% of the millennials believe that job hopping is actually beneficial to their careers to obtain professional and personal growth. 78% of boomers and 62% of Gen Xers feel that it's not okay to job hop. Just a little bit divergence there and different ways to get to the end game. The next slide, please. And careers must align with their personal goals of this generation. Authenticity is important to them. 40% want to have positive impact on the society. Salary is also very important to them. While they cite career opportunities as their highest priority, that's at 64%, generous pay was second highest priority for Gen Zers at 44%. We can conclude that Gen Zers are motivated to achieve monetary security because they've experienced tough economic times. Though they are reliant on their digital devices at work, they are similar to boomers in that they prefer face time and having genuine relationships, especially with bosses or authority figures. So that face time and genuine, getting out from behind their computers and having face-to-face communication was kind of a surprise to me. Aubrey, just this question for you. How do you think employers and recruiters can better understand your career motivations and goals and your generation's motivations and goals?
Yeah, so the last part of what you just said is huge, like that face-to-face and having like genuine relationships. My manager is actually one of my best friends, and I just got a new general manager less than a month ago, and he already knows me as a person, knows my goals within the company just from us sitting down and talking over coffee or just running into each other and asking just how we're doing. And, just, again, like that face-to-face communication and just asking straight up, like, where do you want to be, and kind of providing the resources or the knowledge on how to get to that point.
Yep. Good feedback for us, for sure. And Kirk, how can managers attract and engage Gen Zers in the workplace?
I think it's, Aubrey hit on a really good point that genuine relationships really do matter. And, to think of these individuals that you're working with as more than employees, they're, people that are, really making a difference. And so knowing the why behind all of that, sharing the message of why and what you do and what each person does matters to the overall mission. Remember, this is the purpose-driven workforce, as some have dubbed it, and they want to know how they contribute to the overall mission. So, again, show them the why and really outline kind of what that career path could look like. And again, it comes down to having a genuine relationship and open communication and truly asking, what motivates you? What lights your fire? I have a brand new boss who just started recently, and she's asking those questions right now. What gets you up? What makes you jump out of bed every day, and how can we provide more of those types of opportunities? So I think it again comes down to the genuine relationships and outlining the why.
It's wonderful. Thank you. Next slide, please. And looking at some of the strengths and gaps in the skill set, as we've mentioned, the Generation Z has a lot to contribute in the workplace. They're extremely tech savvy, and they're noted as the digital generation. They're also highly educated, as I mentioned before, with 41% of Gen Zers graduated from college compared to only 18% of boomers. After finishing college studies, Gen Zers are also used to being taught. They're constant learners. They're hungry for knowledge and eager to learn. And they're also used to offering their input, as we've just have been hearing. By sharpening their listening skills, the generation can gather the facts they need and execute based on that information. Another strong point of Generation Z is their ability to improvise and innovate, which can be attributed to their acceptance of diversity. On the other hand, because they are new to the workplace, there are some areas in which they can sharpen their skills, such as writing and presentations. So Bruce, in your research, what other skills gaps have you found in Generation Zers? And I know you mentioned some of this in your recent book, Bridging the Soft Skills Gap, but can you elaborate a little bit on this for us?
Yeah, we've been tracking this gap in soft skills among young people, again, for decades. It's been growing. And so, of course, young people bring to the table so much energy, enthusiasm, the latest and greatest technical skills and tools and tricks and innovation. But what we see is a growing gap in three main areas of soft skills. It's old-fashioned professionalism, critical thinking, which comes from puzzling through problems of first impression and puzzling through them rather than getting instant answers, and then old-fashioned followership. So this is an appreciation of context, an ability to take relationships at work from a service mindset to focus on the interests of the team. That's what we mean by followership. Where the rubber meets the road on this stuff almost always is in in-person communication skills and old-fashioned work habits, showing up on time or early, staying late, taking notes, using checklists, dressing appropriately, behaving appropriately in team meetings. And so we've been tracking this for a long time, and we work with our clients on, helping them help young people build up their soft skills and close the gap.
Right. Great stuff. I know there's an awful lot of talk these days between the soft skills getting individuals the opportunity, to become employed, that where the resume gets the interview, the soft skills gets the job. And maybe, Kirk, from your vantage, are you seeing many of the universities address this with their students before graduation?
They're trying to. It's a huge opportunity in front of universities today. We do find, and I think most people would agree, that universities have a challenge of preparing students for the real world. We give them all the book knowledge and study for the tests and things like that, but how do you really apply that? And so I think that's where experiences like Enactus and other organizations allows you to really get out of the classroom and to apply that and build some of those soft skills, because it's very important to have communication and leadership and project management skills these days, and has always been. And so just doing a better job of preparing them as they leave their colleges, and I think we've seen some readiness programs launch recently. I saw a study from the National Association of Colleges and Employers recently announce some information on a college readiness or a workforce readiness type of program. So it's on the radar. It is being worked on, but we're not there yet. And so again, I think that any way we can provide students with an opportunity to learn outside of the classroom, that'll help them succeed in the real world.
Yep. I second that as well, and I know Enactus does many of that in terms of the association on campus. So hats off to Enactus, and Bruce, thank you for those great comments on soft skills. So at this point, we're going to open up the discussion to our expert panelists to gain insights on some of the issues we're exploring today even further. So there's a question here that we've got on the slide. How can employers cultivate the strengths of Generation Z in a multi-generational workforce? And Bruce, could we start with you, please?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think what I always tell employers is don't make the mistake of thinking that young people want everything handed to them on a silver platter. They make a lot of demands. You know, I don't want to work on Thursdays. I don't want to bring my dog to work, whatever. But they're not asking for this stuff on a silver platter. What they want to know is, hey, what do I need to do to earn that? You know, you should hear that I don't want to work on Thursdays question as, what do I need to give you by Wednesday at midnight so that I am square with you and I've gone the extra mile and I can take Thursday? You know, the idea that young people want their employers to humor them nowadays, it's just nonsense. What young people want is they want to be taken seriously, and they want to hit the ground running. They don't want to waste their time. Of course, they want guidance and direction and support and coaching. They want to know exactly what's expected of them, exactly what do they need to do to earn more of what they need and want. And they don't want employers to pretend they have more authority than they do. They don't want employers to humor them. They want to be taken seriously. Strong, highly engaged leadership, real coaching style, teaching style relationships. That's what drives performance. They don't want weak leaders. They want strong leaders.
Yep. Great. And Aubrey, your take on that question, how can employers cultivate the strengths of the generation in multi-generational workforce?
Yes, I'm just sitting here like praising Bruce for that answer. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think really the only thing I can add on to that is knowing where they're starting at. You know, I have different skills than other people I'm directly working with, whether it's coffee or we can even go to accounting, which is just what I studied in college. So I could have different skill sets in, say, Excel. Other people are really good at filing whatever. But knowing where people are starting at and kind of going from there, that way people don't feel bored and feeling like they're useless or not as useful as they could be. But all of that just comes straight back to communication and having a relationship with employees.
Great stuff. So next slide in this question is going to be for Kurt. Kurt, how can seasoned workers and managers from different generations open up lines of communications and collaboration among the Generation Z employees?
Great question. You know, I see a lot of comments, or I've heard a lot of comments that, you know, this generation is not much different than Generation Y, and they're entitled, they're ambitious, they want things handed to them. And as Bruce stated, you know, they are really just looking for a little bit of direction, and they want to be taken seriously. So, you know, help guide them. We operate under a philosophy, and it's nothing new. We call it the Nike philosophy, and sometimes it just means just do it. There's not really a template for success that we found because everyone is different. And so going back to what Aubrey said, you know, understand who you're working with and who's working for you. You know, what are their skill sets? How can you help them excel? Learn and assist them along the way and solicit feedback, input. They will give you the feedback. They will give the input, most times without even asking for it, which could also be a negative in some eyes. But they really, really value that open and transparent communication. So it's just having the lines of communication open, having the door to your office open instead of closed all the time. Now, when you're on a phone call or, you know, got to put your head down and do some work, close that door. But when you're not, open it up. You'd be surprised who walks in or knocks on your door and says, hey, do you have a second? That's what we're looking for. And I think that can really spark some conversation and set people up for success.
Yeah. I get this question often as I travel, and it comes down to, if you're a seasoned worker or a manager, don't have a stereotypical view on a certain segment of the generations. Be respectful. Don't stereotype. Be open and listen and learn. And know that you're, as a leader or as a manager, you're there to embody not only your employer but also to bring the best out in people, and that usually comes with respect. So, going in, what's your mind frame and frame going into the conversation, and usually that'll lead you to good communication and good collaboration. So, thanks, Kurt. I really hats off to you on those comments. So, the next slide is. Based on a survey, 86% of CFOs that we surveyed from account temps, again, that's a Robert Half company, said that having a mentor is somewhat or very important to career development. Yet the surprising fact was only 26% of the workers have one. The mentoring highway is a two-way road. It can be just as constructive to have expertise and insights following up the hierarchical ladder. So how can mentoring and reverse mentoring help bring the generations together? Maybe start with you first, Bruce.
Well, what we've learned in our research is the most important thing to promoting mentoring relationships is they have to be authentic. But you have to be very careful about forcing mentoring relationships. And, you can create an internal career advisor. You can create an internal expert on, say, social media. You can create an internal expert on any subject, and that person can influence and educate others and build positive, productive relationships that way. What you have to be very careful about is forcing mentoring. Mentoring is a very special kind of relationship. And so there are ways of creating conditions to support the growth of real mentoring relationships. But, a teaching style manager, that's what some people mean by mentoring. Well, all managers should be teaching style managers. Using the expertise of young people and gathering data from their experience and their challenges. Some people call that upward mentoring. I call that being in close dialogue with the real people who are really doing the work. So, part of it is language and part of it is process. And the most important thing is don't just tell people, hey, this is your mentor, because, best of luck with that approach.
Right. And we know that this generation doesn't like to be told like that either, nor does anyone.
Exactly.
Yeah. Kurt, would you have some comments on this?
Sure. Yeah. So overall, I love mentoring. Personally, it's my mentors are the very reason why I am who I am and where I am today. So they have really been instrumental in shaping my career and my overall life. I love the concept of reverse mentoring. We typically think of mentoring as a traditional, old wise person teaching young grasshopper type of mentality. And, there's a lot that can be learned both ways. We all have something to learn. And I think that if we can glean some of those nuggets of wisdom and really prepare those individuals, or even just share with them, what worked and what didn't and why, that can really help propel you forward. And on the flip side, just speaking to the technology side of it, these young generation, we'll use Millennials and Gen Z, they get technology. Why do they get it? Because it's always been part of their life. They don't know the world without it. And so while their older managers may be having a more difficulty understanding the market or the platform or just even how to use the technology, they do it in their sleep. They do it before they get out of bed in the morning. So I think they can really distribute those both ways. And I think if you look at that from that perspective, there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot that each person can add value to each other.
Yeah, I think mentoring is underestimated by a number of people. I mean, the survey we ran says that it's important, but then the follow-through and actually people having mentor-mentee relationships are, only a quarter of those workers have them. Peer-to-peer mentoring is very important as well and can actually add a lot of value to the onboarding process if you're assigned a peer or you're given someone who could actually be a good escort for you and help you pave the way and learn the cultures. So tips off to the companies and the hiring managers on the phone. Listen to the webinar. Consider peer-to-peer mentoring as a good way of executing on some retention strategies because an onboarding goes a long way. So next slide, please. Seasoned workers have a lot to share with the Generation Z because of all the experience, and we just talked about that in the mentor-mentee relationships. But this new generation can bring fresh, new perspectives on things. In a multi-generational workforce, what can fellow colleagues and employers learn from employees of other generations? And let's start with Aubrey, if we could.
Yeah, so I would want to know what worked in the past, what didn't work in the past, and just figuring out what the other generations had already gone through. And sometimes when you do have that fresh perspective, you really, hindsight really is 20/20, and then it's allowing each other to work together and kind of move the business forward. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, most
just
definitely.
Kind of knowing the past of the company or the past of really any businesses and what's already been done.
Right. And Bruce, maybe any answers or tips for the audience on that?
Yeah, well, I love what Aubrey said because I'll tell you what young people tell us in interviews, that here's what they don't want to learn from older, more experienced people, stuff they can much more easily learn from menu-driven information systems or from easily recovered answers to frequently asked questions, repeatable solutions that are available. So don't try to teach them things that they can learn more easily with a computer. The things you can't accelerate the learning curve on are the lessons of experience, and that's what Aubrey is pointing to. So young people, they're very savvy about information sources, and what they want to learn from older, more experienced people is, the lessons of experience, because that's the one thing you can't accelerate the learning curve on.
Well
Thank
said.
you.
By the way, what older, more experienced people, what's that?
Thank you. You put it into better words for me.
Oh, well, I just, what you're saying, it's so poignant. By the way, what older, more experienced people can learn from younger people is, you see this natural adaptation of career outlook. Young people are trying to create a career they can wrap around the kind of life they want to have instead of the other way around. And young people are more comfortable with boundarylessness, and they're much more comfortable with the explicitness of the quid pro quo at work. With work is a transactional relationship, no hard feelings. So that's what I think the grown-ups can learn from the young talent.
Perfect. And Kurt, your thoughts on this?
I just have two very short comments to add to what both Bruce and Aubrey have stated. I think there's definitely lessons of experience to be learned from each generation. There's a lot of things that have happened over time. Situations were different, technology was different, and just understanding what that actually means. Keeping in mind that these new individuals may not be coming in with any type of management experience. Maybe they have led a project, but they've never led a team of people. So I think there's a lot to be learned from the other generations that could really play into the leadership and the management perspective of that individual. And then lastly, I think it's important to know the past, to know the history, but don't let what's happened in the past and the history hold you back. Because it didn't work last time doesn't mean it won't work this time, because things are different. Times change. So, again, I think just learning from it, but continuing to move forward is really the key there.
Wonderful. Our expert panelists speak. Very, very good wisdom coming out here. So next slide, please. Despite generational differences, there are also many benefits of a multi-generational workforce. So go ahead and embrace the benefits, but also constantly be aware of the challenges too, as you fine-tune your approach to managing and working with a diverse team. Once you've gotten past the complexities of managing or working with the diverse generations, you'll realize that you have a treasure trove of ideas and resources to mine. Everyone has something valuable to contribute, and the generations can learn from one another. We can all learn to leverage the differences among the generations to cultivate a richer, more diverse, and inclusive workplace. By getting everyone to cooperate and making sure everyone is on the same page, your organization will become stronger. So at this point, we're going to go into some of your questions, and I'll try and answer and have the panelists answer as many as possible here. So here's one. Why don't we start with Bruce, if we may. Is reverse mentoring just learning from younger folks on your team?
Well, that's what I was trying to say, is you have to be very careful about how you use this language. What some organizations try to do is actually set up a reverse mentoring program where young people who have expertise in a particular area or experience in a particular area make themselves available as mentors and then serve that role in relation to older, more experienced people. The idea of a mentoring relationship that's different just from cross-training is the relationship itself, the idea that there's supposed to be some depth, and that's why you can't force these relationships. But my view is that just putting young people in positions as experts and facilitating upward learning, that's a good way to get started on the potential for creating those mutual mentoring relationships.
Yeah. One thing I've heard too is having work teams where you may have two from Generation Z and then more experienced individual in that work ring, if you will, and it's a collaborative environment, and they're all learning from one another. That's a potential mentoring ring I've heard about.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yep. So here's one, and I'll address it to Kurt and then maybe Aubrey after that. Many times moving up the ladder, if you will, the corporate ladder, from one level to another, your career path, it's not as clear as black and white. How do you approach this situation with Generation Z?
Great question. The career path or the career ladder doesn't always go up. And in fact, I've actually heard it referenced as a jungle gym now. Or it can go sideways, it can go down, it can go up, it can go left, right. So lots of different directions. I think really knowing what the options are, it might not be a step up, at least as far as title or is in the terms of the organization's chart. But it could mean more responsibility or, working on a specific strategic initiative for the organization. So I think, again, it comes down to communication and just being transparent and saying, you may be able to choose your own destination and build your own career path, which is what I've done. There wasn't a a VP position or even a director position before I got to what I've done the last 10 years or so. And so building along the way, building the value propositions and really enforcing that has been instrumental. As a manager, again, be upfront and say, you know what, let's talk about what your aspirations are. Is it to move up? Is it to be in that corner office in 5 years? Okay, here's how we get there. And sometimes you have to write the story along the way instead of having the full book ready for someone to flip through the pages. So it's a very good question. It's a tough one to give a real solid answer to, but I think it really depends on the company, on the culture and the history, and really coming down to what the organization's needs are as well. Right.
And as a member of Generation Z, Aubrey, how would you look at this from your vantage point, knowing that, you know, moving from level to level within your path is not black and white?
I mean, I wouldn't mind, again, like as an individual, I personally wouldn't mind having it not be black and white. I would just want to know what is the new job description, what is expected of me. I wouldn't care much if it was up, down, sideways, just kind of knowing what I'm doing now, when it's going to start, what's expected of me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Let me try and take this one. How can a baby boomer who is a colleague, not a manager, develop strong working relations with Generation Z? How to avoid being seen as a parent or a grandparent? Well, I guess I can take that since I'm part of the baby boomer generation. I touched upon it in some of my comments. I approach everything with an open mind. All my colleagues that are Generation Z or Generation Y, I try to be a good listener. I try to be respectful. I go in with a learning attitude. I go in with an attitude of they know things that I don't know, and they do. They know technology better than I do, and even though it could be a peer-to-peer relationship, not always a manager to manager or manager to employee relationship. You have to keep an open mind, and you have to be respectful and know that there's some things that you'll need to humble yourself in asking why and how come, and you need to be curious in getting them to open up to you. And, you know, I always think if you think young and act young, you will be young, no matter what generation you're from. And that's helpful in a mindset going into those conversations. So, hey, Bruce or Kurt, or anything to add there?
I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Okay, great. So here's a question.
Yeah, I mean, you said it very well.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I spoke over you. Here's a question maybe for Bruce. You're our resident expert and done a lot of research on that. How much is work-life balance important to millennials? And that's Y and Z.
Yeah, I mean, what we see, of course, work-life balance is important to everyone. But what we're finding is the younger the person, the less willing they are to make one short-term sacrifice after another when it comes to their schedule, geography, the people they're willing to spend time with, you know, the nature of the tasks and responsibilities. They're willing to make fewer short-term sacrifices on these things in exchange for vague promises about long-term rewards that may or may not vest in the deep, distant future. So look, everyone wants more control over their own schedule. Everyone wants more control over where they work and their workspace and, you know, the people that they work with and the kind of tasks and responsibilities they have. What you have to understand, the nuance with the youngest, least experienced people is they're not willing to sacrifice all this in the short term when they're young because they don't trust the long-term promises that are being made. Not that they think employers are lying to them. They just think, you know, silly grown-ups, don't you realize how uncertain the world is?
Yeah. And Kurt.
I love that answer.
Yeah, so do I. Kirk, I've got to, here's something. How can you teach soft skills without offending or insulting Generation Z?
Good question. Well, I think you need to, make the purpose known, rather than just going in and say, hey, we're going to do this, and let me show you how to, work this project or this, whatever it is. Tell them, be open with them, and say, this is, I'd like to share with you how my perspective on this. What do you think? Again, turning it back and say, what do you think to someone who is working with you or for you as part of the team? That has a lot of power. Just those short words. What do you think? And it can really get some good perspective from them. So, I don't know. It's always challenging, but I think it's something that, again, comes back to clear, transparent communication, setting expectations, as Aubrey and Bruce have both mentioned multiple times. So it's just understanding, who you're working with.
Right. I have a tip. Depending upon the size of the company that you're with, I've dealt with a lot of our clients, and I've also, large and small. Toastmasters is a great way to have somebody learn how to do presentations, but also the listening that's generated as a result of sitting in the audience and listening to others present as well. So if you're a large company, you can start, work with HR to start your own Toastmasters internally. If you're smaller and a manager of individual that could benefit from that, make it part of their career plan. That you sit down and give them some advice on. And don't just single them out. Have everybody go through it in your department. We've seen great benefits with that as well. I think we have time for one more question here. In regards to retention, what do employers need to concentrate on to keep the new generation happy? Maybe I'll just open it up to Aubrey first. What would keep you happy and want to stay with your employer?
Just kind of respect from the top down, obviously like bottom up as well, but just respect, relationships, kind of opportunities to show off my skills a little bit. I like to feel important, and that could just be my personality coming out, but as long as I feel like I have a purpose where I work and with what I'm doing, I'm perfectly happy.
Bruce, comment there?
Yeah, I think, it's the fair quid pro quo when it comes to, knowing how to earn more money, and it's more control over schedule, it's more control over relationships at work, more task choice, learning opportunities, location and workspace. It's the whole transactional relationship, and it's a balanced quid pro quo. And I think one of the things I try to tell our clients is when you start to understand where young people are coming from through the lens of, hey, this is America, no hard feelings. It's just the quid pro quo. Well, of course, we work internationally as well, but if it's business, no hard feelings. It's just everyone's looking to have a fair deal at work. So I think that's and that is a big change, because it used to be short-term sacrifice in exchange for long-term promises.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And Kurt, any comment here?
Ditto.
Ditto. We like that. Well, we're through with our hour. On behalf of Robert Half, this is Paul McDonald saying thank you to Bruce Tolgan, who's from Rainmaker Thinking, Kurt Ballman, who's VP of Career Services and Alumni Engagement at Enactus, and Aubrey Ryder, our panelist, college graduate and Enactus alum. Thank you very much to everyone, and have a great day.